Sorry, guys.
That's right. Technology and simultaneous getting this process is always a fun thing to intermingle.
Right.
If there's no comments, we'll all in favor of approval of the previous meeting minutes, say aye. Any opposed? Pass unanimously. Thank you. Scheduled matters. We've got a draft that was provided by Mr. Webster this morning. So we didn't get it emailed out until a little later today. There's a hard copy in front of you. And this is to address the discussion we had around the service agreement with the ambulance company and some of the anticipated deficits potentially that might exist with ALS personnel, as well as aligning the service agreement with some of the dispatch methodology. So I might have said everything I need to say in that introduction.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's all good.
Whatever review of that you can provide us, that would be great.
Yeah, I guess I'll just kind of summarize it, by saying that, the two things that really stand out on this are the fact that the nomenclature is a little bit different because dispatch changed their classification system, which actually makes a lot of sense, and actually that greater level of triage gives us a greater degree of discretion on response. That, coupled with the fact that we're pretty shorthanded on paramedics, as is the rest of the world. We want to make sure that we're utilizing those paramedics to the best of their ability, and so that they're available and deployed on the life-threatening calls. So being able to use dispatches, triage and classification system, and allowing for BLS ambulances to be dispatched to BLS calls means that we can, have those paramedics more readily available for those life-threatening calls. Sending a paramedic to a lift assist or a paramedic to the flu isn't necessarily the best use of resources. And when there's a cardiac, a chest pain going on across town and your paramedics tied up on a lift assist, that doesn't feel very good. And so being able to send those EMT staffed ambulances to those lower acuity calls and having a paramedic available or who's responding to other higher acuity calls really makes a lot of sense in the resource management world. So that's a driving force.
Any questions?
Yeah, the one thing I will say that maybe just a little bit of discussion, but on the very bottom there, the second line up from the top, it starts with BLS red. We use the same verbiage as shall provide a paramedic on the LS medical responses. I do have in there either through direct ambulance staffing or in concert with the BLS ambulance as a single resource. We see that a lot of EMS systems across the nation have a single paramedic in a response vehicle to respond to those ALS calls. They're not necessarily attached to a specific ambulance. And so that's what the intent of that line is. We will either send a paramedic staffed ambulance or a BLS ambulance with a paramedic chaser, so to speak, if that makes sense. And I tag that in because as who knows, as staffing changes, as the system evolves, it gives us some ability to look at different staffing models without having to go back through and ask for a second revision. So if there's any questions about that.
We had a discussion with a couple other medical directors as well. Do you want to summarize that as it relates to some of the dynamics and flexibility that we might find we need to incorporate into how we provide ALS BLS care versus ALS BLS transportation?
Yeah, so myself and John and Brent Baresh, who's the EMS lieutenant, captain. we met and talked with Dr. Phelps, who oversees medical practice for our operation, and Jake, who oversees medical practice for most of the rest of the county, and talked about, any, I guess, any thoughts, concerns, ideas about, BLS ambulances responding to BLS calls. We all know that there's some gaps that when somebody calls 911 and they're interrogated by the dispatcher, they don't always get good information. So we do know that there are some gaps, as far as classifying needs. Those gaps are relatively few and far between, but they do happen. And so, in instances like that, request a paramedic or a paramedic ambulance, or in instances within the city proper when there's a paramedic on scene, then they may discontinue care and transport in with us. I think it was a pretty good discussion. I think everybody realizes, that pre-hospital is pretty volatile right now, and we don't necessarily live in ideal conditions. And in most circumstances, an EMT equipped or AEMT equipped ambulance is going to be capable of handling 75–80% of these calls. I think all of them felt like transport capabilities is better than waiting for transport capabilities. So having those ambulances available is more important than making sure that they're paramedic equipped. What else?
The other end of that scale was if ALS providers encounter a patient who is low acuity, is there a disruption of continuity of care for them to say, well, now I'm going to provide as a paramedic my patient to an EMT to continue the transport and deliver them to the hospital? It's normal practice in many, many systems, but it is new to the methodology that we're accustomed to, not just in Helena, but in Montana in general. So it's worth educating and providing directive to the care providers that that's an acceptable practice, and we validated that acceptability through medical directors for both services. Any other questions or discussion?
No, are you anticipating an operational change on deployment?
Yeah, short answer is yes. When exactly that's going to happen, I'm not sure. We're continuing to recruit paramedics, but it is in the not too far off future that we will not be able to put a paramedic on every which will mean BLS trucks for BLS responses. As it is right now, we're permitted to respond to those lower acuity calls with BLS ambulances. And we've been trialing that for a few months. Had actually really good success with it. But we'd like to be able to expand that role and make sure that we're all comfortable with those BLS trucks. Right.
Did you have any see this as an amendment to a specific section of the ambulance service agreement? Did you have any other areas that you felt need amended in order to be accommodating to these potential changes down the road?
I don't think so. That's really the only one that I identified as, as a potential, point of difficulty.
Any other questions?
Much comment.
Sure.
I'm in support of it. I think coming from a system that was very similar to this, and of course our protocols coming from King County, like transitioning to this maybe a more efficient way of deployment of your resources is going to definitely help in efficiency and cost abatement, that kind of stuff as well. So having BLS rigs that can maybe be a quicker response and be on scene to transport obviously helps roll fire, and then holding back your ALS. It's I think like you were saying, 20% of your calls, maybe something like that. So the system is formed many ways, probably what you guys discovered, but it's definitely a system that works really well. And then you can maybe not have to, as you were saying, really figure out which resource you have to go to what call, because you're tying up an ALS on a BLS call. So I've applaud the efforts and appreciate it.
Thank you.
Maybe a comment and a question. Comment was I appreciate this type of work and trying to make the agreement work with what you have, which is not what is ideal. And I guess the question I would have is, have you looked at other mechanisms that might give you some help in doing the work like this, where you are adjusting how you do this, making priorities, not changing the level of service, but it'll provide some help to you?
Well, I guess I've looked at a number of different deployment models. Is there something in the back of your mind you're thinking of specifically?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm kind of relying on you to know the way you operate, obviously better than I do. And
Yeah, so
having some other ideas on how to make this easier on yourself, and then still, while still providing the service.
yeah, I can say that at least for the last probably 2 years, I've been exploring other staffing models and looking at other systems and how they utilize their EMTs, their ambulances, their non-transport units, their paramedics. And consistently a model similar to this is seems to be what's ruling the deployment models out there. It's interesting, especially on the East Coast. This is more standard than not. And when we looked at a lot of that stuff, like you mentioned King County, which is the one closest to home. They actually manage their system on very few paramedics per capita. Like I think at one point they had 56 paramedics that they deployed throughout the entire several million people system. So it's one of those deals where I'd really like to hold on to what we've got, because especially in rural areas, it's nice to be able to send your paramedic to the unknown, have that support. Bit of a rabbit trail, but there's several studies out there that actually look at ALS deployment models where in urban and metropolitan areas there are no paramedics, and then they staff paramedics in the rural areas because they're typically under-resourced for critical access, for for skill level, for whatever. And it was kind of interesting. It's almost a reverse deployment of what we're used to.
Distance to the hospital.
Yeah. Which I thought was actually kind of an interesting way to look at things. But the short story is I haven't found anything that seemed workable, in the system other than some version of this. But I'm definitely open to discussion or other ideas.
Any other comments or questions? So we have a proposal for an amendment to the ambulance service agreement. What are our public meeting obligations to act on it?
You do not have. So are you asking if you can today act on it, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure. That's a good place to start. Yes, let's see if we can do that.
So the language was sent out to the members just today.
Correct.
This morning.
Yeah.
Correct. I guess I would feel more comfortable if it hadn't been just sent out recently, especially because when was the agenda posted?
Last week.
Last week sometime.
Yeah.
And talked about an amendment, but we just didn't have,
We didn't have the language.
we didn't have the language yet, yeah. Um,
And that was solely on my Hayes, so I
Yeah, no,
apologize for that.
no blame, just
okay.
trying to understand where we are. I do think this agenda language is specific enough about the specific section that had an amendment proposal to it. Our practice in the city has been to have the specific language that is proposed. So I think legally we could do it. I'm just not sure that's in line with our practice. So I guess I would throw out there is there an ability to wait till next time? Understanding it could be 3 months out.
Once a year used to be the normative
Yeah,
rotation for this,
right,
and this is our second one this year
right.
already. So it really depends on your comfort level and the appetite for the board to have another meeting.
I'm comfortable of moving ahead with this. And
Okay.
like I said, our legal responsibility is to adequately provide notice to the public in our agenda that we'd be acting on it. And I see that as,
And if they wanted to be here to find out what the narrative of that substantive change was, they could show.
Yeah.
Okay. Is the board fairly comfortable with that legal interpretation? And if so, if there's no other comments or questions, I want to entertain a motion on the requested revision of section 2.1.
So just for clarity, I guess my question is from Rural Fire would be that we're not changing service level, it's just how its resources are deployed. What we're potentially like ramifications of the changes.
Yeah, the potential is now if you get a BLS yellow or a BLS red, you could have a BLS unit show up.
One of the biggest changes really is making the language
Equal
match dispatches
Yeah.
language.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I guess I'll speak up down here on the end. So I think that's a really good point about the fact that we just got the amendment a few hours ago. Just want to make sure we fully understand it. It looks fine to me. It looks like it makes sense, but oftentimes things turn up when you take a little more time to thoroughly review them. And this is more of I think a technical process kind of question. The proposed amended language has several acronyms: EMT, AEMT, quotation marks, BLS yellow, BLS red. And you've done a great job of explaining what those are in the text of your note here. But the agreement itself doesn't explain what those acronyms mean. You know, you all have seen as many of these as I have, right? You usually have a definition section that would say EMT, and it'll be defined, or AEMT, or BLS, and none of that is contained within our service agreement language. I just ask it as a question. Is that something we need to be concerned about or make sure is very clear or not? And again, it's explained well in the narrative you've given us here, but it's not in the actual ambulance service agreement that we approved back in 2020. So I'm just wondering, I'm asking the question, should we have those acronyms defined in the agreement itself? Just for clarity for all the parties, you know, if none of us were here, you know, whoever replaces us, would it be clear to them in the future? So just a couple of questions. Thank you.
Good question. I guess it sort of begs the other question, is there a middle ground where the board is comfortable allowing the ambulance service provider to adjust services on a as needed basis in alignment with dispatch so that he can make those accommodations as necessary in a resource limited environment, but that will actually ratify the language and clarify the intent around it at the next meeting? Is there a middle ground that we can satisfy both sides of the issue? Please.
You did mention you weren't sure when this service would start happening. Is that also a middle ground? To Roger's point, maybe we do have some time. If you're not, if we could have another meeting to discuss this question, obviously, it might give us time to address some of these issues, given that you weren't sure when you were gonna start implementing this anyway. So
So,
there was a question in there. Did you
yeah,
catch it?
while the timeline, isn't specifically spelled out for us, we do know that it's a rather abbreviated timeline.
Okay,
And what, what concerns me is, withholding dispatching an ambulance because of the verbiage of the contract, because we don't want to, violate the when we could send at least at that point.
What if, Chief, we approached it this way in that we take the existing agreement and amend it, including definitions, then send it out to the board so that you can see it in context and perhaps advertise a vote. Computer,
Zoom, yeah.
Do a Zoom meeting to
Zoom.
get
or maybe do a Zoom.
a
meeting.
single agenda item meeting to get the vote done.
Yeah, but then we actually have the full text of the amended agreement and how it all fits together.
Yeah, and that sounds consistent with the middle ground that had noodle grounds. Yes, sir.
And I don't think it needs to wait for weeks or months. I think that once we get that agreement and review it, then we have a Zoom meeting, vote on it.
Do we really need to wait just for definitions to be put on the last page of this? Because it sounds like everything's here. All you want is a glossary at the end that says EMT is this. ALS is this. I don't know if it changes the contract, it just clarifies acronyms. Is that what we're talking about?
I think any language that changes on the document itself, it is probably worth it to have a draft of that we approve as a group. That's my gut sense of it, but I'm not sure there's 100% right and wrong answer.
I guess coming from the field that we're kind of talking about, I think those are, national defined terms that, are used in training and administrative codes and the law. So I don't think there would be any squabble about what a definition would be, what an EMT is or an AEMT or something like that. Because those are nationally defined, and specifically our training from the National Registry of EMTs is kind of the service abuse for training. I don't know if that, although I do agree that we probably should have a definition section. I think those are nationally recognized definitions of what that provides as a service. Go ahead.
There is a definition section already. I think it would be expanded to include these terms. I will say, as a layperson, when I looked at the language, it wasn't as clear to me as I think it could have been. And so to Roger's point, it's not a bad thing to have clarity in a contract that what we know is there's going to be some difficulties in the future that we might have to talk about. And so I guess I think this is a good middle ground because we're not really having to spend a whole lot more time on it. We have a draft. It also addresses the issue of potentially public comment with a draft that everyone's clear on. And so I do like Tim's idea about that middle ground, to use John's language.
Okay. In which case, I don't think we need a motion on anything necessarily today, other than if that's an agreed upon methodology, we can draft this up, get it out, and do another meeting notice and have a single agenda item on Zoom to decompress the time needs of everyone involved.
who will be responsible for putting together the draft?
I will,
Okay,
yeah.
it's
I got
just,
the
I
language.
mean, our normal practice here at the city at least is we have an actual proposal in front of us, full context, and then we act on it. I understand the intent of what we're doing here, and it makes sense to me. I just am a little nervous about approving a contract that's not in front of me.
And I appreciate that. So that's a good chance for us to do it right. And now that we've got the proposed language from the ambulance provider, we'll be able to draft the actual service agreement with the amendments in it. And I think that'll give us a chance to get it out in front of everybody. Take action from there.
Sounds good.
Any other discussion or public commentary on the MOU or amendment to the service agreement? The only other thing we had then is just any additional continued discussion on financial outlook, hardships, and requests for subsidy. It was brought up and is noticed in the minutes from last meeting. Dave, back to you.
Well, I think the big thing is to understand whether we were, whether we had a legal definition of an ambulance district and a taxable district. And I don't know where we stand on that or not.
So I kind of I called you and left you a message. So we haven't actually talked about it, but this is what I was thinking on it. This is created by interlocal agreement. And within an interlocal agreement, you have to talk about how you can financially support that services within that agreement. And that is, and each of the entities can be one, can be many, has to have the specific authority to do what it is you're going to do within an interlocal agreement. So what the city can do to do assessments, districts, all of those things is something we could do in an interlocal agreement, but it would still have to be something approved by the governing body. And so I guess that's a heavy lift, and it's something above my pay grade. That's legally how it's done, but that question on whether we should do it is another matter.
I think where we're at today is the authority to contract for ambulance services. It's nothing to do with the district or an assessment.
Right.
If there's a consideration for that, I think we've got a lot more work to do.
A lot more, yeah.
Because this law was put into place to contract for services to keep the ambulance chaser out of the area. Specific provider, dependable service, etc. Any other model than that, I think we're at the front end of any discussion. And then you look at the reason for the interlocal and the authority that exists under Montana statute. What other options are available? Do we create an ambulance district through an interlocal agreement? I don't know. But I think, certainly not prepared to answer that question today.
Yeah, and I totally understand, and I guess I'm not necessarily asking for that answer today. I just think back to our compatriots in Lincoln that tried to go through taxation to support their ambulance service. Were essentially told they couldn't because a district already existed. However, I haven't been able to find, a legal definition of district as it exists. So, so part of it for me, it was clarifying, whether or not it existed, and since it does, then, that's a place to springboard off of, in the future. But while, while we may see, a larger amount of the financial benefits associated with it, I don't want to make it seem like, that this is solely a St. Pete task. My intent would be to support all the transporting and even some of the non-transporting services out there, if taxation, or subsidization is possible. Because, I, looking around, the news blurbs that come out saying neighbors, lose services. It's, I think something that we're all kind of faced with in any give or take service, really. But, hits home particularly strong when we talk about EMS services. So my consideration would be much larger than my operating area.
Any other questions or comments?
On a specific topic, it does reference in the service agreement, and this is because I'm new and just need the definition. The board service district, and it's mentioned a couple of times in that articles. So what is the service district?
My understanding is it's Lewis and Clark County.
That's always been my understanding, but I'm just going from memory,
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Sure. And then the legal entities that make up the group would be like the city, the county, and we were talking about East Helena, is that correct, in the last meeting? So because of their defined as each legal entity is being kind of a partner in the contract, is that correct?
I will say though, because those districts are specifically defined, like it may be, the premise may be a countywide district, our responsibility is not county.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it showed in there that like Augusta, I think was not listed on that.
We do have an agreement to do for backup.
Yeah.
Augusta.
That is a primary.
Any other questions or comments? Anything else for the good of the order? We'll throw out there in the bylaws that we confirmed in the last meeting, there's also a requirement to nominate and vote on a vice chair. So someone who can carry out meetings in the absence of a chair. But I think we could probably address that in the next meeting as well, if that's online. So we'll just preemptively say that it'll probably be an additional agenda item. So don't be surprised if you see that on there as well. I think that's most easily been done through the admin Stephanie's. Tim, Mr. Burton's and Stephanie Crook from the fire department, they've been the go-to resources to meld schedules together.
They tell us where to be and we try to show up early.
If there's nothing else, motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second. Second.
Awesome, thank you, sir. I couldn't see, I didn't know. All approved?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
what was that?
Take more. All my voice.
Oh, did you